The game of Dungeons and Dragons is a lot of rules to know and understand. And sometimes those rules are useful and sometimes they're not. That's just how the game works. But there are also plenty of alternative rules that add a little more flavor to your game. So today we're going over my favorite alternate rules for Dungeons and Dragons. Hey fellow Game Masters, I'm Richard Quiner, and welcome back to the Daily D20, your daily dose of all things tabletop role-playing games, helping you build your world and master your game. And today we're getting back into game mastering. We've been talking about barbarians for a while, now we're getting back into some of the Dungeon Master stuff, and these are some rules that have been published. They're in the Dungeon Master Guide for D&D, but they're published alternative rules for how you can run things, or things you can just add into your game to give it a little more flavor, a little more pizzazz. So let's add some pizzazz to our games. As we dive into these, though, I want you to think about any house rules or alternative rules that you use in your D&D games or any other tabletop games you might have, and let me know those in the comments below. First up on this rule set is hero points. Now, hero points come into play. They're a different way to give your players a little more boost of power, make them feel a little more heroic in their endeavors. How these work is at level 1, a player will start with 5 hero points. These hero points last until the end of the level, so they do not regenerate overnight. They only have those 5 hero points throughout the level of level 1. Then whenever they level up, they lose any unspent hero points, and they gain new ones equal to 5 plus 1/2 of their character level. So if they're level 2, they would get 6 hero points. If they're level 4, they will get 7 hero points. That's kind of how that would work. You can do the math on that one on your own. So these hero points are things they can expend throughout the game as they're playing through their adventure to really get some heroic moments. Now, what are some of the options they have to use to spend these hero points? First up, they might be able to expend one of their hero points to use a D6. They can roll that and add that result to the results of a D20 roll. So let's say they're making an attack, they roll a little low, they might want to use their hero point. They can roll the D6, add that to their attack roll, and possibly hit after that. It gives just a little more heroic factor into that attacking moment. The other option they have is to expend 1 hero point in order to take 1 failed death save roll and turn it into a successful death save. That essentially means they would be a lot harder to kill them because they would be just succeeding their death saving throws if they decide to use these points for that. The important thing to note about these hero points is you can only use 1 at a time, or the players, I should say, can only use 1 at a time. So they can't just stack up a whole bunch of hero points on 1 D20 roll. They can't say, oh, I want to spend 3 hero points and get 3 D6s to roll on this D20. They can't do that. And also, they can roll the die that would come into effect, but they choose to use the hero point before they hear the results of the number they would roll. So if they roll a D20 and it's really, really bad, and they want to see if a D6 will help, they can roll the D6, and maybe they roll poorly on the D6 and it won't really help. They might be able to guess that much, and then they can choose to not expend the hero point. I hope that makes kind of some sense. I've been seeing that rule a lot lately in the books as a way that players can roll the die and see if it helps them before they decide to expend a limited resource. And the other thing with these hero points, of course, is you are the DM. You can come up with your own effects that these hero points could take. Do you want these hero points to be worth maybe an advantage on something? Realistically, the sky's the limit because you're the DM and it's your table and you get to make these rules up for yourself. Next, I want to mention a couple healing options. These are different ways that healing can be handled in your game. First up is the healer's kit option, which means when a character wants to heal at all, they would actually have to use a healing kit with bandages and maybe some Neosporin, perhaps. They would have to use the kit that the character has in-game in order to roll the hit die to regain their hit points. This would slow things down a little bit. This would make characters really think about if they want to get into combat and, really look at their resources in their inventory. I think that's kind of a neat idea. I might put that in my game, but most of my games right now, I've been playing with a different rule system, and I don't want to switch that on them too fast. The opposite side of that, giving players a little more chance to be a little more healing of themselves, especially with parties that don't have a dedicated healer character, is the Healing Surge ability, which dates from the older versions of Dungeons and Dragons, but they had kind of took it out for 5th edition. But basically, the Healing Surge is on a turn, a player may use an action to roll hit die to regain some hit points. Each hit die they roll is equal to the number rolled plus their constitution modifier, and they regain that health, and they're able to expend up to 1/2 of their total hit points. That way, a player, if they are already damaged in combat and they just need a little more longevity, they could just take a turn, roll their hit die, get a little health back, and then get back in the fight. In this sort of situation, since the players don't need to wait until a short rest to use their hit die, on a short rest they would actually regain some of their hit die, just some, there's some numbers in there, and then on a long rest, of course, they would regain all of their hit die. This gives them a lot more longevity, makes them feel a little more epic, they're a little tougher in battle, and a lot less scary for the players if they don't have a healer. And the other opposite of that is the super slow healing characters. The slow healing rule set basically means characters don't fully heal up after a long rest. Normally on a long rest, you sleep, you get fully healed, except for any big major injuries you might have. With the slow healing, the long rest is when the players can actually expend their hit die to regain some hit points. So it becomes a very dangerous game going throughout a day in an adventure where you could take a short rest, but it won't really help you the same because you can't expend the hit die there to heal up. You have to make it through the end of the day or to your next long rest in order to do that. This gives you a little more realism, as wounds, we're not all Wolverine. We can't heal up fast all the time, so wounds take a little bit. But this just adds a little bit more of that sort of gritty realism to the game. The plot point alternate rule is one that gives the players a chance to really have a big impact on the story being told. But I will warn you, it is not for the faint of heart DMs. If you are the type of DM that really wants the story to be your story that you're telling with your players, and you don't want them to mess up your plot, don't use the plot point rule. That's all I'm going to say. It's got a lot of kick to it. How this works is at the start of a session, each player has one plot point. They can only use one plot point per session, and the players do not regain plot points until every player has expended their plot point. Now that I've said plot point enough, let's say it a couple more times. There are several different rules of how you can use plot points that go from kind of simple rules to more complex. So first off, with the plot point at a rule option, and these are rules you'll decide as the DM with your player before you even start your game. I'm not listing out options. I'm not giving you like option A, option B, and option C, and then the players can decide. I'm telling you, this is like rule set A, rule set B, and rule set C. So keep that in mind. That's how this works. So rule set A is the plot point is a twist. How this works is at any moment in the game, a player may decide to expend a plot point, their plot point, to add a twist to the scenario. For example, you're in a big room, a locked room perhaps. Plot twist, there is a secret door over in this corner that is discovered by a player. Maybe they just finished a nice dinner with some nice friends. Plot twist from a player, oh, the food is poisoned. That's just an example. That's not a good one because players wouldn't really poison themselves. They might, but that's just an idea. That's the plot twist. It's just one main device that can be introduced to the story that changes the course and the flow of the story being told. The second option, rule set B, adds on to the twist, and it is called thickening the plot, which would mean whenever a player expends a plot point, first they get to add a twist to the scenario. They say, oh, there's a door in the corner of this room that was hidden. Then the player to their right gets to thicken the plot a little bit by adding some more details to that situation. It could be good, it could be bad. Maybe there's a door in the corner, but oh, the plot thickens because that door is actually trapped. Something even simple like that can change the course of a story and make it less in the power of one player's hand, because now the person who plays the plot point adds their twist, but then they have another player can change things even more. The last rule set C, is where it's really not for the faint of heart, because this is not just adding twists to the story. This is when the players, and they all have to agree to do this, a player may expend a plot point, and then that player who has expended their plot point takes over as the dungeon master of the game. This means every person involved in the game, including the original dungeon master, has to have a character ready to go. And then whenever they are DMing the game, their character kind of takes a back seat on the adventure and just becomes a follower. And then when someone plays a plot point and becomes the DM and takes over for the session, their player can step into the foreground and begin participating with the adventure. You can see how this is something you got to establish early on. You need to have all your players that want to be willing to DM and run their game. This rule set method, method C, is called the gods must be crazy. because it is pretty crazy. One player can have one idea of a story, and then they might have something that triggers another player to say, ooh, I like that idea, I'm going to run with that and change this over here. And it can create this weird dynamic of the story kind of changing hands so many times. It makes for an interesting storytelling experience. It's not exactly, a perfect story being told, but with the right group, you can find some really interesting environments here and some interesting plots that can come to light. That's why I say this is really not a plot device that if you're a faint of heart DM and not good with improvising, you don't want to use this one. But if you got the right crew, by all means, it sounds pretty dang fun. In fact, I'm probably going to try and find a group to do this with. I think it'd be cool. Yeah. And the last alternate rule that I want to mention is the idea of injury tables. Injuries can give some real lasting effect of the combat in the game. And I'm sorry, most of my players, I'm going to start bringing in some injury rules in our games because I want to spice things up a little bit in the game room, if you know what I mean. Injury tables work wherein certain triggers happen in the game, and you can define these triggers for your table however you want. Then you would roll the dice on a specific table that is in the Dungeon Master Guide and apply the injury to the character that this affects. Some of these triggers are things like if the character drops down to 0 hit points, essentially being knocked out. When they have to start taking death saves, that's when they could also take an injury. Another option, a little easier option to get some injuries, would be if a character takes a hit that is a critical hit. They could roll on the injury table. And even more, they could have a situation where if they are already knocked out to 0 hit points and they fail a death save, then they roll on the injury. I think that's an interesting way to add some real maiming to the characters and really give some disadvantages. And the rules, you'll see, I'm not going to go over all the injuries on the table because there's a lot, but you'll see how they can give some different effects and give disadvantages to the players that will really affect and impact the story being told. A couple of these injuries are things like losing an eye or a limb, like a hand or a leg, could come into play. Those, of course, would impact the player in their movement and their perception type stuff. You could have a festering wound, which would lower the player's hit points over a time until they find the proper healing. These kind of injuries would change the dynamic and actually probably put the party on different paths of adventure to try and solve the problem at hand. A player loses a leg. If they're in the middle of a dungeon, that player won't really be able to put on a peg leg right there. They might have to escape that dungeon, get back to town, get that player fixed up and patched up and ready to go. That kind of situation could occur. What are some of your favorite alternate or house rules? Let me know in the comments below. Let's have a little discussion about those. And as always, I've been Richard. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see on the channel, remember to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified when I upload new videos. You can also click over here to see more videos in this playlist, or over here to see what YouTube suggests you watch from my channel.